Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza, and I'm joined, as usual, by John Sheeran over in the Queen City area. John, how are you, sir?
I'm great. I'm in the room that I grew up with. I know I get the vibe sometimes that our listeners don't think me as a Bengals fan because I'm very negative a lot. But as you can see behind me, those are just some of my jerseys that I got over the years. The one in the middle is a custom one. It says Sheeran on the back. So I am in fact a Bengals fan, in case some people may not think of it. And I was a pretty big one back in my youth.
Yeah, well, it's also a nice little shrine to your achievements as a kid. There's
Oh
trophies
yeah,
and
it's like
medals.
all the Little League baseball stuff. I was on a powerhouse team. I was like the youngest kid on that team, so it
Nice,
carried me.
nice. Well, good to have you with us. And John, it's basically the start of. I mean, it's one of the major events of the offseason here. The NFL Combine is sort of underway. Interviews and teams were kind of arriving in Indianapolis the last couple of days. Some news and notes to talk about there. We'll get to that along with some other news and notes in terms of Bengals coaching hires. We're going to talk about the John Ross situation. We also have a question of the week, and we're gonna kind of have a little bit of fun. Try and it's been there's been a lot of drama with the Bengals in such a what's supposed to be kind of a quiet period of the calendar. So we're going to try and have a little fun and have a fun discussion with you, the listeners, as well. And then we'll get to some listener questions at the end. You can get to us in the live YouTube chat with your questions throughout the entire show. We'll get to those. If you're joining us on cincyjungle.com, you can leave them in the comment thread there. You can get to them, get them to us on Twitter at BengalsOBI, or you can give us a call or shoot us a text. We'll be taking texts throughout the show. Calls later in the show. 949-542-6241 is the number. We're happy to have you with us. And but kind of before we get to the segment later in the show about the question of the week, just in case you don't follow us on Twitter or you didn't see it, we asked a question about which Bengals figurehead you would like to see a documentary on. So whether that is one that's, I mean, there's been a couple of documentaries recently that have been made, whether that's a 30 for 30 or a Football Life or what have you. There are some interesting people that I think we could choose from. We've already got a lot of responses. So vote if you haven't yet. Vote on Twitter at BengalsOBI. That post is there. Get us your information, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. John, let's kick off the show though with. I guess let's talk about the coaching hires. Last week at this time, we were talking about how Lou Anarumo was basically the favorite, the favorite of who was left, who had not said no. And then lo and behold, a day or two later, it was officially announced that he is now the defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. He's been on the job for less than a week, and now he's at the scouting combine. I don't want to rehash a bunch because we talked about him for a little while there, but I mean, I guess it's expected that he was the guy, given some of what we had heard leading up to last week's show. Are you feeling any better about it, or is this kind of a settlement by Zac Taylor and the Bengals?
Yeah, and honestly, they hired it was first reported that Zac Taylor was hired like Thursday, like the day after our show back in January, and then they hired an interview on Thursday as well. So they're really helping us out with that. But
I know, appreciate that.
My thoughts aren't really any different with Anarumo. I cannot say his name right on the first time ever.
I'm terrible about it myself.
It's going to be such a struggle, like writing his name throughout the season.
Anarumo.
And he comes from Staten Island, so I assume he might have some roots in there. So, no, but 29 years of coaching experience. Last time as defensive coordinator was with Miami for, I think, 12 weeks. But before then was in the early 90s with, I believe, Marine Merchant Academy. So it's been a while since he kind of built his own defense, and that was always going to be a risk. And when you hire the very last defensive coordinator in the NFL, it's never going to be a slam dunk hire from the beginning. But as we've talked about, it's really hard to judge coaching hires initially, especially when you have guys that without an experienced track record to the name like a Wade Phillips or someone like that. So at the very least, the positives are he's worked with Taylor before. They have a good relationship that they had in Miami. So I think there's going to be that camaraderie and that cohesion by association with them, so they can establish some type of culture early on both sides of the ball, because he is by default the second most important coach on the staff, because Taylor's going to handle the offense and then Nehru's going to have full control over his defense. And what that defense looks like and who's on it, it's far too early to know. And it kind of stinks for him that he had to really accelerate his evaluation of the full roster right before draft season really begins for a lot of these coaches. And now they've reportedly hired their final 2 assistants on the defensive side of the ball, and maybe Anarumo had hopefully had some input on that. But I think he's a decent coach, and if he turns out well, great. If he doesn't, then they won't be able to. Then at the very least, they'll be able to start looking a lot earlier in the calendar year for his replacement.
Yeah, and we mentioned this last week. There are a lot of inexperienced coaches and or first-time guys getting kind of promotions on this staff. Anarumo is one of them. You mentioned he was a defensive coordinator, but it was at a small school at the college level. So obviously that's, there's some worries there. Zac Taylor himself, first-time head coach. So, there's some inexperience on this staff. Quickly, you alluded to the fact that the Bengals basically hired 2 other assistants. One is Nick Eason, former NFL player, former Steelers player. And he's going to be coaching the defensive line. Your thoughts on him? The Bengals apparently wanted Aaron Henderson, and he said no, or basically opted to go to the Rams, ironically. And now the Bengals have got Eason in the fold for the defensive line.
Yeah, so a friend of the podcast, Jake Liska, who is co-host of Locked On Bengals, he kind of alluded to, or he talked about Eason's just track record. He played for the Steelers for a while under Dick LeBeau, and then he went to be Dick LeBeau's defensive line coach in Tennessee, and that's where he spent most of his coaching career so far before he went to Austin Peay this past season. So he has a lot of experience working with the defense that Dick LeBeau runs. And that's the old-fashioned 2-gap 3-4 defense. And obviously, as the years have gone by, LeBeau has evolved his defense accordingly as well. But I kind of like that hire in that sense, where the Steelers defense dominated the Bengals for a long time when they were at their peak, and they always had a good control of defending the run, which is obviously something that the Bengals had a lot of issues with. And honestly, I liked the Bengals' last defensive line coach, Jacob Burney. I thought he got the most out of Ryan Glasgow in the 3 games that he played. I thought he was making a nice step. I liked the progress that Carl Lawson was showing under him. And I like Burney. I think he brought some good things, and I think Eason, having just retired from the NFL about a handful of years ago, experience under experienced defensive coordinators, I think this was a solid hire for when they made it. And the defensive line is I think we felt a lot more comfortable about the defensive line in the offseason last year than what we do now, because there's more uncertainty. But I think Eason provides good coaching experience, good just overall experience as a player to really get the most out of the guys there, and hopefully bring in some guys that provide qualities that they don't have right now.
Yeah, and obviously familiar with the AFC North, which is a big plus in general. Interesting though, Steelers guy ran some different defensive concepts, and the Bengals have traditionally run Marvin Lewis and who they have on the roster. So going to be interesting to see how that turns out. And then the Bengals seem to be hiring Tem Lukabu. I think he was he from
Mississippi State?
Yeah, Mississippi State. And he's going to come in and be an assistant here as well. Any thoughts on him? I know he's kind of a little bit of an unknown guy as well.
Yeah, so continuing with coaching trees, I believe he was with Greg Schiano for a number of years. I know he was with Rutgers, and he was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I don't know if that was when Schiano was there. It might have been a little bit after his time, but he was with the Bucs. He was with the 49ers as the defensive quality control. He's been largely just like a general defensive assistant, but most of his work has been with linebackers, because that's the position that he dominated in college, and he dominated Colgate and never made an NFL career out of it. But he was actually born in Congo and graduated Bachelor of Arts from Colgate. He's a very intelligent guy. He's only 37 years old, and I think Eason's also in his late 30s. So continuing the trend of young guys, kind of getting their feet wet still in the coaching game and coming back to the NFL. I think this is going to be a good opportunity for him, because honestly, he has I don't know want to say the most free reign, but his position group is going to experience probably the most volatile changes with, guys coming out, maybe guys coming in, because honestly, the linebacking group shouldn't look anywhere close to what it was in 2018. So I think he's going to have a decent amount of input on what is going to be on the field for that position group this year. And I'm excited that we have someone kind of brand new on the scene that can provide some like fresh and innovative coaching techniques.
Yeah, so I mean that's the young and innovative. That's kind of the name of the game with the Bengals staff this year. And whether it works out or not, you got to say, I guess, kudos to them, because they got kind of set in their ways and things got stale, and now they've really kind of redone a lot of different stuff, and that comes with the youth on the coaching staff. Taylor and Duke Tobin kind of took the podium on Wednesday at the NFL Combine, and there was a lot of interesting information. One was specifically about a a certain player that was a recent top 10 pick. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but Taylor kind of talked about the fact that there is a little bit of it's either coaches he worked with, or if he was not familiar with them or has never worked with them, he said, they were people that he knew through people that he worked with, type of thing. So it is kind of an old boys club in some way or another for Taylor and his coaching staff.
Yeah, and it was another point where, I mean, Tobin is pretty used to this, and I think Taylor has gotten pretty good in a short amount of time as a head coach to kind of talk the way the head coach kind of talks and not give away a lot of information. But Tobin, clarified that, Sean McVay did not get Taylor the job. That was a poignant part of his thing. Expressed confidence in Tyler Boyd. Hopefully that kind of alludes to a potential extension going forward. But mainly from Tobin's press conference, because unfortunately, I think he got booted off the stage early because next after him was Kevin Colbert, the Steelers GM, and I guess everybody in Indianapolis wanted to talk to him about Antonio Brown. But before he got off, I think he talked a little bit about the 2019 quarterback class, and something that has annoyed me and a lot of other Bengals fans is that obviously they grade all quarterbacks, but they weren't interested, and they weren't even considering taking a quarterback in 2017, 2018, when guys like, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson, even Josh Rosen were in play for them. Now he's talking about, he's evaluating the 2019 class, but he says it's not very deep at the top, but he didn't rule out taking a quarterback. And I think that's important to at least note, because, they both Taylor and Tobin expressed confidence in Andy Dalton, the usual thing that they say all the time, but at least keeping that door open, that possibility open, that if the right guy is there, then they won't be afraid to take him to just improve the team in any way that they can. I think, it's not much, but at the very least, it's not saying, Andy Dalton is confirmed, 100% the starter for 2019, or just any veteran for that matter. If the door is open, that's all that we can ask for, I guess.
Yeah, and there were some other interesting comments from Taylor, kind of saying, "Oh yeah, Dalton is, a right fit," and he kind of said some similar things about Dalton that he said when he first got here, and he kind of reiterates the fact that he likes what Dalton can do in his offensive system. So we'll see how true that is, and other items are that he and Duke Tobin talked about. There was a couple of other things in there in terms of free agency. They talked about Tyler Eifert. Duke Tobin talked about Tyler Eifert and kind of said, "Yeah, we'll talk about him."
Like the same thing they said last year,
right?
Like the same exact situation.
Right, and it is the same exact situation, because productive guy when he's there, hurt, missed most of the season. So, there's that, and then I don't know. He was a little lukewarm, at least from the words and what I heard from him. It was a little lukewarm on Darqueze Dennard coming back. I don't know if I read that differently than you did, but he kind of was like, "Well, we'll see."
Yeah, and it was almost like the same thing with Burke. It's like they didn't really give it like a thing. I guess he said what he wanted to say about the situation without confirming anything, but it wasn't like any resounding vote of confidence that like he's just like a centerpiece of anything. But you know, it's lion season, and people call it smoke season, but it's really lion season, and they're all incredible liars, and we do our very best to overanalyze everything that they say.
Right. And, you know, some of it's coach speak, some of it's just, you know, it is what it is. So, but interesting comments nonetheless from both Duke Tobin and Zac Taylor. Obviously, they're there scouting the players at the NFL Combine, as are the coaches, and this new staff that is getting pieced together is down in Indianapolis looking at the prospects this year. And, you know, we'll start hearing things as April comes around. We'll start hearing things about how and who the Bengals are connected to in terms of rookie players and guys that they're kind of gravitating to. One other thing I thought was interesting was, you know, it sounds like they're gonna. We'll see. I mean, do you think that they're going to put more emphasis on, you know, tape or the interview, or do you think they've seen enough on tape from some of these guys that it's now more about meeting them and talking to them? You know, it seems like Marvin Lewis's staff really was into the interview process, at least from the outside looking in. Do you get the same vibe from this staff, or is it too soon to tell?
I think it is a little bit too soon, but in general, like I feel like most of those tendencies under Lewis kind of really escalated towards the later years when Marvin had a lot more experience under his belt, and with Taylor as a first-time head coach, just learning what he saw from like McVay, and I guess back in the days with Joe Philbin, he might have a different process in general. But you know, like the combine is like the most important thing at the combine is like the medical evaluations and just meeting the players and getting a grip on, you know, who they are as people, because at the end of the day, these are, you know, very expensive employees that you're counting on as human beings to work under your system and to fit in your culture. And it's just like most other jobs, only it's not like most other jobs. You know, these guys are getting paid to do the thing that they're very good at. And, you know, I believe that most coaches will say that tape is king and it's the number one thing that's important about it. And I don't expect Taylor to say anything else. But as far as like, you know, ketchup bottle shaking analytics and like handshake analytics that our old offensive line coach Paul Alexander had, and I'm not sure that that's exactly going to be rehashed. But I mean, we'll start after, like, you know, if Taylor ends up here for more than a couple of years, we'll start to get a notice on his tendencies, and this draft class will be a very interesting one to see from the start, because they're in a good position. They have the second most picks in the draft, and we'll start establishing what type of trend of what type of players he gravitates towards.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. Just another quick little bit of news: the Bengals were awarded 3 compensatory picks in the 6th round. I mean, whoopee, yeah. I guess. Yeah. That occurred since our last episode as well. I mean, obviously this team needs some depth. They need to replenish some positions, but I don't know that 3 6th round picks, if you use all those, is really going to net you a lot of impact players personally. But and if you look at the track record under Marvin Lewis and the who they have used 6th round picks on, it hasn't net very much in terms of
no Tom Brady's there.
No. Well, there might be one this year. I mean, that's always the goal of this thing, is to find that type of player. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. You can get this show on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play. It's also on the Megaphone platform. You can get it on YouTube, and all of our stuff is on cincyjungle.com. So subscribe to our channels, download our material, and yeah, we've got some interesting stuff coming up, I think, over the next handful of weeks in terms of draft shows and combine shows and all that kind of stuff. So stick with us.
So it is line season at the combine, where 32 teams congregate in a giant hotel ballroom in St. Elmo's Steakhouse, and basically they all lie to each other, or lie to the media, or say things that the media takes out of control. One of those things, maybe one of the biggest news pieces, was our own John Ross, and how it was reported that the Bengals were in the process of beginning to field offers for the 2017 first-round pick. Here's the facts in the situation. John Ross, if the Bengals were to trade him, it would cost them a little bit north of $5 million in dead money. John Ross has 7 touchdowns in his career, but only 21 receptions. overall, the tape is not tremendous with Ross. The production is not there. And honestly, if the Bengals were to successfully trade John Ross, they might not get more than, let's say, a high day 3 pick. So when it first came out, when the news first came out, the initial response was, this is stupid. Why would they do such a thing? John Ross is still 23, 24 years old. We haven't really seen fully what he can do at his best. But there is another side of this, and as it comes with a new head coach who brings in most of his assistants, he has types that he likes at certain positions, and when evaluating the roster, he has his own perspective on who kind of fits with the guys that we are established here, that we are determined to build around, and as a result, sometimes the roster shakes up. So to dismiss this rumor right off the bat, even with Duke Tobin vehemently denying it and Zac Taylor kind of denying it as well, we can't, I guess, put it completely across the table, because there was also reports coming out today from ESPN's Kat Terrell that teams were inquiring about trading for Ross during the season. Bengals claimed that they weren't interested in that. So maybe this rumor was just a culmination of a few months in the making, and it kind of leaked right at the time where these things sort of leak. But Anthony, if the Bengals were truly considering to trade John Ross, is it a good decision or a bad decision?
I think it's a bad decision on a number of different fronts. And if you want to kind of be stock market guy about it, it's buying high and selling low. And I think there is other, and you mentioned also that there's a pretty significant dead money hit if they got rid of him, especially for a guy on his rookie contract. So, and the Bengals are a team that usually do not, I think they are one of, if not the lowest in terms of teams that carry dead money currently. Mm-hmm. That's just the way they structure. And I think part of that is, they don't guarantee as much money in contracts and all that kind of stuff. But for all of the belly aching that I know I have done about the team and their lack of free agency focus, at least they have kind of that where they can say, yeah, we haven't done as much, but we're also never in salary cap hell, which is never fun for any team. So, now, granted, that wouldn't do much, but in terms of putting them in salary cap hell. But here's my thing with it. You have guys behind who are the top 3 receivers on the team: AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, John Ross. You have guys behind them that probably need to. Some need to be elevated, and some need to probably be shed. I think. Mm-hmm. I think Cody Core is a guy that you probably need to sit here and say, well, maybe that's just not working. And there's some other guys in there, and maybe you elevate Alden Tate as more of a possession guy, and maybe that's he gets another shot. I don't know if he is in the mold of a Taylor guy. That may not be music to some Bengals fans' ears, but my thing is, we've seen players and receivers in particular. Hell, there was one on the team last year that did it. Year 3, big jump, Tyler Boyd. Nelson Aguilar is another guy who ended up becoming same kind of thing. I think Marquise Lee a couple of years ago in his 3rd year down in Jacksonville, he ended up, after struggling his first year or two, he ended up coming up and becoming a decent player, even though their offense was terrible last year. But my point is there's still a lot of untapped potential. There's still a lot of I guess it's still, to me, this should be an experiment type of year for Zac Taylor in that he should be able to, even if it's for a year, have Andy Dalton, have John Ross, and use them in a system and be like, does this work? Now, that doesn't mean you don't bring in another wide receiver. That doesn't mean you don't bring in another quarterback. It's just, to me, you've already experienced 3 straight losing seasons. You've got some talented guys on this team. I would hate to just have them just really kind of dumpster fire the entire thing, get rid of some of these guys, and then all of a sudden we're looking at a 3-win season. What would be perceived as kind of a major regression from the last couple of seasons, which is saying something. And I think that John Ross deserves a chance in this type of pass-happy offense. the Rams used guys, Robert Woods and Brandon Cooks, that can do some similar things in terms of speed and all that kind of stuff that Ross can. I think Ross has been his own worst enemy in Cincinnati, but I think he hasn't made any. He didn't make any friends with Marvin Lewis or anything like that. But also, I think there were missed opportunities for big plays last year by Andy Dalton. There were some questionable play calls by Bill Lazor in terms of the fact that Ross, yeah, you can go deep with him, and yeah, you can shoot him deep, but there should also be a lot of yards after the catch type of plays called to him, and there has not been that. Easy pitch and catch, get Dalton's confidence up, get Ross's confidence up early in a game. Maybe it's an 8-yard play, but it's a screen, and all of a sudden, on first down, you're looking at 2nd and 2, and it's a nice play. It's those kind of things where you go, well, I just would like to see him get one shot in this new offense, and I think that next year, if you try and trade him, even if it doesn't really work out as well, if you try and trade him next year, you probably won't get that much lower of a pick than you would this year. I don't know. To me, I just think that he needs another year here in Cincinnati.
To play devil's advocate, because I know a lot of people like John Ross, but a lot of people from the start did not like the fit, not only with Cincinnati, but in like Biller's offense, but also with Andy Dalton. I was one of the people that assumed that because Ross played with Jake Browning at Washington, Browning by and large is like a college version of Andy Dalton. Not the greatest arm, not the greatest velocity, kind of on the shorter side or whatever. But Ross produced fine in Washington with a limited quarterback in Browning, and just off face value, I would think that the transition from Browning to Dalton wouldn't be as bad as it is. But clearly, Ross has not succeeded at all. It is just with one season with Dalton at the helm. I think he had the 2nd highest uncatchable target rate out of all guys of targets over 20 yards, and I don't think that's coincidental considering Andy Dalton and Jeff Driscoll are throwing in the ball. So if this is a realization that 2 years in, this guy, we're going to be committed to a quarterback like Andy Dalton, and this guy is not fitted to play with him and to succeed with him, and he's not going to be able to fulfill his potential, it is at the very least beneficial to open the possibility of making him expendable for an asset where you could find similar production, because I think it's production against potential with Ross, because the production is probably replaceable. 7 touchdowns is kind of a lot for only 21 catches, but at the end of the day, 21 receptions off 55 targets, you can probably replace that in some way, shape, or form. But it's like, if you get a 4th or 5th round pick, are you going to get someone who has the potential to become what Ross can be? And then you go back to, is Ross going to fulfill his potential with Andy Dalton, or a quarterback like Andy Dalton throwing him the ball? And that's like the push and pull that they're going with. So from that sense, I can understand why this trade would make sense, because if the Bengals do want to win now, and if fans do want to win now under Zac Taylor, then getting a guy who fits better with Andy Dalton to be that 3rd receiver in an offense that's probably going to be 90% 11 personnel with 3 receivers on the field, it's not the worst thing in the world. Obviously, and again, like going back to your stock example, this is like them buying on a startup that just started at the IPO, seeing a tank for, unfortunately, reasons out of his control, because I think we can agree that Ross does have his own issues, but most of the issues plaguing him weren't exactly his fault. So now you're selling him at a very low price, and teams are going to pounce on that with a 5th or 6th or maybe even a 4th round pick, and then potentially see that value rise up when he's still in his early 20s. So it's not a good deal on the surface of the Bengals, but I understand some of the logic behind if they want to get this run going fat for an AFC North title that's still pretty much in the makings of being possible. I can understand it from that sense, but at the end of the day, like, they're not going to get back nearly what they put in for Ross, but it's also, if they do end up making this deal, which it's still completely up in the air, I can understand them just cutting the losses on a player that unfortunately they just kind of missed the eval, because even beyond the fit with the offense that's in place, he's probably going to be injury prone for most of his career. Like, he hurt himself running the 40-yard dash, and if he can't maintain that elite athleticism without getting dinged up more times than not and becoming, I guess, the wide receiver version of Tyler Eifert, then that's an unfortunate loss you're going to have to take on his evaluation. And if they feel like this time is right to unload on him, then there's at least that perspective where you can understand it.
Yeah, there's other, to play devil's advocate on my own argument here. I mean, who knows what he's like in the locker room, really? I mean, there could be some issues there.
This could be his own, like,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, there could have been some sort of issues there. I had heard some rumors that towards the end of last year that he was kind of at odds with the team, and I thought basically that was a Marvin Lewis type of situation. He and Marvin Lewis, and so I kind of see some other factors. If a high pick is offered, like a second round pick or something, then you go, okay, well maybe we listen a little more intently. I don't see that being the case, but. Right. I mean, I think it's worth giving him another shot in this new system. And look, if you were, and this isn't really a great reason to say don't unload him, but if you were to trade him, look at the draft, the first round picks from 2013 through, basically last year, right? Yeah. I mean, you had Tyler Eifert, won Pro Bowl, but hurt all the time. You had Darqueze Dennard, decent slot guy. He's had some injuries here and there. That's a first-round pick. Cedric Ogbuehi, I think we know the deal there. William Jackson missed his entire first rookie season. He's been a pretty good player when he's been out there. Didn't have an interception last year, though. And then, you've got Ross, and then you've got Billy Price last year who missed a good chunk of the season. So, when you say kind of laissez-faire, you missed the eval, normally I'd say, totally, John, I get it. But when there's kind of a track record of like a lot of high picks with some issues, you can't keep whiffing on these types of things. And not saying that all of those guys were whiffs, because they weren't, but I think they are more disappointing than I think we thought they would be. Yeah. I think that's a pretty fair statement. But
like successful teams don't have like 3 consecutive first round picks, all free agents in one offseason, and the likelihood of all 3 of those guys coming back is like 0. And that's exactly what it's with Eifert and Dennard and Ogbuehi. And that was like the start of like their downfall, because if you're not active in free agency and you rely completely on the draft, and then you have unfortunate misses in the top of the draft, it's inevitable that you're going to be unsuccessful.
Yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately, these kinds of picks have kind of put the Bengals behind the 8 ball. But as you mentioned, though, John, I think, and I kind of want to ask this portion of it to you. Tobin and Taylor kind of just said, no, we haven't even had – and Tobin was very emphatic that they have not had discussions about John Ross. You also said this is a time for great lying. Do you believe that they have? I think let me just back up for a second. One of the initial sources was Tony Pauline, who is a draft guy. He's got some good connections and all that kind of stuff. However, he was a guy a couple of years ago that floated the rumor randomly that the Bengals were going to cut ties with Carlos Dunlap, and that never even came close to happening. He kind of floated this. He was one of the early guys floating this one out there as well. Obviously, Ian Rappaport also ran with it. But, I mean, do you think that this was just like a random thing? Or do you think that, like you said, maybe this was based on some calls they received earlier, and now as kind of people are reconvening and being around each other, they're talking about it more? Do you think they really are set in keeping John Ross based on what they said?
I believe whenever any GM says we are not interested in doing this at all, it's because they haven't had an offer that's even close to what they want. And I think that's honestly the reality of any type of situation with this. And it could just be that they have simply not entertained any offer at all. But usually when there is smoke, there is fire. And I'm not saying that's 100% of the time, but when you're talking about a player who has largely been unsuccessful in his first 2 years, in half of his rookie deal, may not fit entirely with what the offense wants to do, it's not implausible for it to be untrue. But I think a vast consensus came to the conclusion that Ross is not worth anything more than like a pick just outside the top 100. And I just don't see the Bengals even looking at that. And that's essentially saying, yeah, we're not doing this. And that's basically, I think, where that statement could have come from, if not them just completely telling the truth. And honestly, I'm not distrusting. I'm not saying, GMs and coaches are just bad people, but I just don't trust most of the words that they say around this time of year.
Yeah. But for now, John Ross remains a Bengal, and hopefully he takes that big leap in year 3 that we have seen Tyler Boyd make and other guys make in the NFL. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He's John Sheeran. You can get this show on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play. It is also on the Megaphone platform. You can also get our material on YouTube, and all of it is on Cincy Jungle. John, before we kicked off the kind of everything we've been talking about, we put out a tweet on our account, Twitter account here about it was a poll. Which team figure or which figurehead would you want to most watch a documentary on? So, I mean, there's 30 for 30s, there's a football life, there's all kinds of stuff. Unfortunately, because Twitter being what it is, it only allows 4 answers. So we kind of just went with like 3 major ones and then other. Chad Johnson leads the way by a landslide and 50%. Boomer Esiason was 16%. 25% was for Anthony Munoz, and 9% was from other. We also got a couple of interesting answers. I'll talk about those in a second. But if you were to say, I want to watch a documentary on this person, their life, their time with the Bengals, what they're about. And you can give me more than one if you want. But who are some of the more intriguing names to you that you'd want to watch a documentary about?
So the obvious answer is Chad, but he's already had a football life.
Yeah.
So like I would be down for round 2 because I'm sure he has a lot more to say. So that's like the obvious answer, because I like you just thinking like, okay, who are the guys that just gravitated to you the most when watching them, who had the most involved in their lives? And honestly, for the most part, the Bengals players have been pretty uninteresting, especially in this era. But I think beyond those answers, I would like to learn more about Ken Anderson, because I believe that I think he's by far one of the greatest Hall of Fame snubs, and I think that's a story worth telling. And just to get more context about how good he was in that era, and you can see on some era adjusted statistics that he was clearly the best when he was playing. And maybe tell us about that first Super Bowl loss, and just kind of how he was a part of those early or late 70s teams that kind of established the Bengals as the beginning of a legitimate franchise. But just to get to know a little bit more about him, because I think there was a feature on him in the Inquirer, Cincinnati Inquirer last year, about what he's doing now and how he doesn't really care about the whole Hall of Fame thing. But he's one of the greatest players in this franchise's history that's unfortunately been snubbed by the greatest honor in pro football. And I think Bengals fans would be really interested in learning more about the person that he was, because they already know, because they're the few people that know that how great he was at playing football.
Yeah, really good one. That was one that I wavered back and forth in terms of putting Boomer or Ken Anderson on the poll. I put Boomer just because he's just far more outgoing. Right. I think a lot more fans are just more familiar with him just because he's a more recent quarterback, and he's on CBS and he's on, all kinds of platforms, and really intriguing guy. So that's why I put him there. Just a couple of other interesting answers here, John, that I thought were worth talking about. Mike Donahue on Twitter and Chris Francis in the YouTube chat said Chris Henry. I thought that would be a very interesting one. Real that'd be real sad as well. Interesting one from Evan Hill says David Pollock. That's an interesting one. Jamie on Twitter says Sam Weish. I got a couple of those as well. Sam Weish, obviously a very intriguing guy in Bengals history. So all of those I would love to see. I mean, it depends on your definition of a Bengals figure. I mean, I think Terrell Owens would be a very interesting one to see as well, even though he's with the Bengals for a year. One guy I would really, or if you want to kind of group them together, they just get forgot about a lot because it was such a bad era of Bengals football. But the Jeff Blake, Carl Pickens, Darnay Scott group. And for me particularly, Pickens is interesting because Pickens was a guy that he was an abrasive wide receiver, but he wasn't like the diva guys that you saw more late 90s, early 2000s, that were kind of the showman guys, I guess. He was a guy that was at odds with ownership a lot because he hated the losing, and he was a guy that you didn't hear a lot from him. And I think part of that is the fact that 1994, 95, 96, there's not social media and all that kind of stuff, and he just wasn't. I think he was very not so. He wasn't very much into talking a lot in the media, and he wasn't this look at me guy. But on the field, he was amazing. He wasn't the fastest guy. He wasn't, Calvin Johnson build, but he was a big guy. He made incredible catches. I don't know. That group of guys, I think, would be very interesting to hear their perspectives, hear what they have to say about the Bengals and ownership. Those are guys that are very interesting to me. Darnay Scott, another guy that, I think he was a little bit of a one-trick pony in terms of a deep threat guy, but God, he was fast, and he put up some decent numbers with the Bengals as well. So
since that was your era and more of your era than mine, I honestly just thought of this now. Would you say it's fair to say that Blake, Pickens, and Scott, that trio, is like the value brand version of Culpepper, Moss, and Carter in Minnesota?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that. I think Minnesota had a little bit more because they also had Chris Carter, they had Randy Moss, and they had Jake Reed. A lot of people forget about Jake Reed, and Jake Reed was a really, really good football player. And what was crazy is they had those three with Culpepper, but they also had Randall Cunningham had a nice resurgence with them too. So it was like a crazy deal. But yeah, it was Blake was a guy that didn't do so great on the intermediate throws, but the short and the deep ball, he was just outstanding. He and Pickens had, a couple of Pro Bowl seasons between both of them, and they just go overlooked so often because they were in an era that the team was just so bad. And I mean, you could go back and talk about what could have been. I mean, you look at the fact that the Bengals basically they moved on to Jeff Blake, they had Carl Pickens, they had Darnay Scott, and then they invested in Kajana Carter. And you're sitting here and you go, well, that should have just been that offense should have been able to take them places. Well, obviously we know what happened with Kajana Carter, who, by the way, would also be a very interesting documentary to watch. That would be another interesting one to watch. That one just came to me like that. But I mean, just some of those guys that, we hear so much about the guys in the 80s because the team went to 2 Super Bowls. We hear about all the guys in the Marvin Lewis era because they were more competitive then. So for me, those are a couple of guys I would be interested to hear a bit more about. We had a comment on the thread in Cincy Jungle by Darkest Deity, Mike Brown, talking about used jockstrap. That was. I
think the less I hear from his mouth, the better.
Yeah, I would. I'd be fine about that. One other one I thought, and I guess this has to do a good one from Sean Blankenship here, Corey Dillon, Will Smith.
Yes.
Yeah, Will Smith, Odell Thurman. That would be a really interesting one. Andrew Seiler, documentary on Obuehi. I don't know if you're serious or not, Andrew, but I'd probably pass on that one.
Like a tragedy.
Yeah. The one I would be interested in, and even though he played for a number of different teams, but he spent, I think, the most of his career, and unfortunately he made the news again this week, is Adam Jones. That might be just chronicling his life, maybe his upbringing, and all of his troubles. That might be an interesting one for me. I don't know about you.
Yeah. And with Jones, it's more sad. Like you're disappointed that this stuff keeps happening, but at the same time, like it's just sad that, and not only Adam Jones and the Randy Gregory, the draft pick from a few years ago, he suspended again for substance abuse, and I feel like a lot of people take the Josh Gordon route where they just assume that these guys are just like stupid and they shouldn't have these privileges that they should. But I mean, whether it's addiction of drugs or alcohol, like this is serious stuff. And unfortunately with Jones, it appears to have happened again. And at the same time, you can't count on them to, produce for your team, but they're also humans. And they undergo a lot of stress, and whether it's Jones or Gregory or even a guy like Gordon, like it's more sad, and I feel like we should probably have a little more empathy for those guys.
Yeah, I mean, the shame in and I don't want to get on a big soapbox about it, but you know, I think that he would be an interesting guy for a documentary and Pac-Man. But you know, I think you're right in the fact that the big shame of it for me is, you know, he's in his mid-30s, he's got 2 girls at home, he's married, and he's it's one thing if, you know, you kind of keep getting into trouble but it's the same kind of things.
Yeah.
It's the same venues. It's the same situations. It's the same, to me, it's like, I don't know. He's just not learning. Or he's just, you know, like you said, maybe he's addicted to certain things, and I don't know, but not my place to judge, but it would be interesting, especially what happened in the Las Vegas situation, that tragic situation a handful of years back. Hearing about that, I think that would make for some compelling stuff. Thanks for everybody, and you can still vote. The poll is open on Twitter. We just wanted to kind of have a little fun and talk about some of the more interesting people. Oh, there's some more good ones here, John. Roger Moore says TJ Hushmanzada. That'd be a good one. The One says Takeo Spikes would be good. Rusty Shackelford says Andrew Whitworth. I think that once
that's going to be in the making for sure.
Once he closes his career, I think they'll do a football life on him, I'm sure. So good for him that he's been able to keep his career going. And he recently announced this week that he's going to play again this year. So, awesome. Good for him. Yeah, right. And Rusty follows it up. I would like to see a doc on the 2005 Bengals. There's a lot of characters on that, both on the player side and the coach side. A lot of good stuff. But for now, the Bengals, and they were very well done. Carson Palmer they had a football life on him. They did one on Paul Brown, which I thought was very entertaining. I don't know if you ever saw that one, John.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really well done. And they did one on Ocho a while ago. So, you know, there's probably more coming up. Maybe Marvin, maybe somebody else. I don't know. But, you know, hopefully they spread the wealth a little bit in terms of making some of these documentaries. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. We're going to get to some listener questions here in just a second. You can get those to us via YouTube. We've already got a bunch teed up, so we're going to try and get to as many as possible. You can get those to us in the live YouTube chat, the comment thread on cincyjungle.com. You can also get them to us on Twitter at BengalsOBI or by texting or calling us 949-542-6241. This show is available on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play, on Megaphone, on YouTube, and on cincyjungle.com. John, there's a bunch of different ones I could go with. I guess we can start with quickly on this one. Frank from Virginia. What's the opinion of how the defense is going to be set up? 3-4, 4-3 hybrid, personnel changes, that sort of thing. I think that's kind of the question du jour with the Bengals, given the defensive coordinator situation, who they just brought in on defensive line as the defensive line coach. So your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, they're going to be rushing 4 guys and dropping 7 into coverage for 70% of the snaps, whether it's they're in 4 down linemen or 3 down linemen for the 20-something snaps in the game, where people like to harp on their quote-unquote base packages, but the defense isn't changing that much. Hopefully they work a little bit on their scheme, a little bit with their linebackers and putting them in better positions to make use of them. That would be the biggest adjustment, that what their front 6 or 7 is going to look like and how they're going to attack it. I don't think it's going to change that much. But honestly, though, It is interesting how some assistants for the Bengals have experience in that 3-4, and they could be more multiple and do a little bit more different things, but ultimately I think it's going to be pretty much the same. Yeah,
and I think the Bengals will probably still do the nickel, a lot of nickel stuff, and that'll depend.
Everything does. That's just how it is.
That's what the personnel on offense usually dictates to them. We do have another call on the line. It is from Spencer from Cincinnati. And Spencer, thanks for calling in. I know you tried to call in last week and we missed you. What's on your mind tonight, buddy?
say thanks for having me on. I hope my question isn't outdated. I don't think it's been directly touched on, but I was very high on the Zac Taylor hire and the change that the Bengals were having. I did have some concerns with him basically hiring a bunch of friends and ex-colleagues. Does that kind of show like a lack of maybe leadership or command of a room, or him being open-minded to other people? If he's surrounding himself with friends, won't they be more inclined to agree with him and maybe be a little easy on him?
That is a great question. Hey, John, your thoughts on that? I've got a couple thoughts of my own on it, but your thoughts on what Spencer's asking with Zac Taylor's staff of cronies, I guess.
Yeah, cronies is like the perfect. It's not so much as nepotism as it is in cronies, but I think it's a double-edged sword, man. Like you have that aspect of it where you're a first-time head coach and you're with a bunch of guys that you worked with in the past, and presumably you're establishing some type of workplace where you're an authority, but you're not going to be challenged that much because you're surrounding yourself with guys you trust, and hopefully they're they're going to be in a position where not only does he trust these guys, but they trust him to tell him the truth, and in order for him to make the most decisions, he's going to rely on a lot of their input. But also at the same time, when you are that young first-time head coach, then you're going to be surrounded with guys that are comfortable, that are going to buy into what you're building as far as the culture goes, as far as the system goes. So I think it kind of works both ways, and you kind of have to take the good with the bad. Me personally, there was some hires that I was really questioning. Is this guy just hiring him not based off his qualifications, but just with his past associations with them? Jim Turner's like the guy that sticks out to me most with that. But at the same time, I think there are some benefits with it, and it's kind of just something that you gotta have to take with the good with the bad, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of where I'm at with it as well. I see it and I go, well, young coach, first-time head coach, he's got to have guys that he trusts in the room. He's got to have guys who he thinks, number one, will be on the same page as him. Number two, run the systems that he is familiar with and he wants to run. And number three, just having guys in the room that'll give it to him real about certain players, certain situations. Now, I think Spencer brings up that what happens is when you bring in a bunch of guys to work under you that you're comfortable with, there's the possibility of, you're going to run stuff that everybody's on the same page, and it should be potentially a well-oiled machine, but you run the risk of just hiring, and I think this is maybe where Spencer's coming from. You run the risk of maybe hiring a bunch of yes men, and I don't. That would not be good. And not to say that everybody needs to call out Zac Taylor or anything like that, but if he's just kind of saying these things and dictating these certain things, obviously he's the boss, but I'd like to think that he's hired guys to not really push back, but at least give their 2 cents and make it a valuable piece of 2 cents. And the other facet, Spencer, that I think goes into this all is the carousel of the defensive coordinator situation. I think that has kind of turned a lot of people, I don't want to say turned a lot of people off, but it has the positivity, a lot of that has kind of dissipated when, you're now 6 or 7 coordinators down the pecking order, at least according to reports.
Yeah, it was my deal.
Yeah. Well, thanks for calling in again this week, Spencer. Appreciate it. Make it a habit, buddy.
Yeah, of course.
All right, take it easy.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, take it easy. That was Spencer calling us on the phone line there. We had another question from a good friend Carlos Andre, and oh boy.
Oh, I saw this one.
Hey, it's a good one, but it's trading for Josh Rosen. I mean, there's talk that the Cardinals are going to be enamored with Kyler Murray because of Cliff Kingsbury and Steve Keim, their GM. They really like Kyler Murray, and even though this is a new coach, and even though last year's regime brought in Rosen, they may move on and try and dangle Rosen out there for a trade. Rosen did not have a good rookie season, but that team was
awful,
hot garbage. Yeah. So I guess your thoughts. Let's start with this. Your thoughts last year on Rosen as a pro, because you with us last year when we were kind of talking about some of these guys. So I'd like to get your thoughts on Rosen's professional outlook based on tape you watched of him and things you saw about him.
I didn't watch a ton of Arizona, but I do know that that offensive line was nothing to write home about. And it's hard to just judge a young quarterback, a first-year starter. I think he started 13 games. I think he came in week 3 when Sam Bradford was playing awful, predictably, and the offensive line had no one besides maybe Mason Cole at center, no one at tackle, no one at guard that was worth starting on the field. It's like starting 4 Alex Redmonds and Bobby Hart. So he was having trouble not only like, you know, finding time to find guys open, but all he really had a receiver was Larry Fitzgerald for most of the year, and Christian Kirk kind of stepped up towards the later year, and he just started developing good chemistry with him. But overall, it was just like by far the worst offense in the league. They had no idea how to use David Johnson for most of the year, which is basically impossible when you think about it. But yeah, like rookie years for quarterbacks in large part are just they're just kind of irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. Only very rarely do rookie quarterbacks like Baker Mayfield, Russell Wilson light it up in their first year, and that's usually when they're surrounded by great talent up front on offensive line, have great options on the outside, and have an offensive coordinator in a scheme that kind of works with them. But Rosen, the prospect, and I'm not exactly comfortable doing this because I don't like when people do this, but when you compare Rosen to the top guys in this draft class, I wouldn't say that he would be anywhere different in terms of rankings. I think he was a top 3 guy last year, clearly, maybe even top 2. And I think that's where he would be if he came out this year competing with Haskins and Murray. So you're thinking you're getting like a top quarterback prospect for the price of not even trading up for one, which is what you usually have to do. So in theory, I think either having Rosen behind a veteran like Dalton or putting him in, you know, immediately to still try to get his feet wet would be a pretty decent situation, because he does have good receivers. He at least has more pieces on the offensive line than he had to work with in Arizona. Hopefully, you know, Zac Taylor implements a friendly system to whoever is quarterbacking his football roster in 2019. But like in general, I don't think they necessarily do considerably better or considerably worse with Rosen compared to Andy Dalton, even though Dalton's a more established veteran. But there's raw talent to like about Rosen, and I think he's a smart and intelligent kid that's going to be able to command a locker room. But when he kind of hits his stride, and that's not happening yet, but it's a long-term investment for the Bengals or any team to possibly make this happen. And I wouldn't be completely against it. I do see the flaws in it all, but I like Rosen as a quarterback prospect, and the Bengals do need to find someone eventually to take over for Dalton. I think this is not the worst avenue to take.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question for you, but just real quick, my take on him. I saw quite a bit of him at UCLA. The kid makes throws that are just wow.
They're beautiful.
And there's times where you're like, dude, do you even care? Do you even care that you're on the field right now? And I think – you know, I think part of that was UCLA kind of earlier in his career was a decent team. And then towards the end, it really kind of, they started to kind of fall apart. And then he kind of, I think, had some injury issues and that sort of thing. But he's got an arm. He can make a lot of throws. It's a consistency issue for me with him. And, I think the upside is definitely there, and I think, you know, I think you talked about it with John Ross situation. It's the, you know, you would then be potentially buying low on a guy if the Cardinals decide to go that route. The follow-up question I want to have for you on this is basically, I mean, obviously the Bengals trading for Rosen is something that would be interesting, but obviously there's a value aspect, and it depends. There's a dependent issue on, you know, what would they be giving up. So what's kind of the maximum type of capital you would be willing to give up probably this year for a guy like Rosen right now?
I would think Arizona want that 11th overall pick, and like I would probably start with like a couple day 2 picks, because of what we saw from Rosen, and it's just kind of like playing the whole negotiating thing and hopefully keep it there. But if it ultimately comes to that 11th overall pick, you're thinking, okay, what am I giving up if you know I keep that pick? I get maybe a top 2 tackle in this draft class, and maybe getting Devin White, the best linebacker in this draft. But, you know, honestly, you know, fans have been saying, you know, this team is in a position to win now, and to me personally, it has to be, if they want to go further than where they have in the past, 7-8 years, they probably need someone a little more talented than Andy Dalton. I think Rosen can become that, and the sooner that you have that quarterback in place in your system, the better. And honestly, like if it costs the 11th overall pick, then I would strongly consider that. It might end up actually pulling the trigger if it's that 11th overall pick and they keep the rest of their picks and they keep their future picks. Maybe if they have to give up like a future third or something like that, maybe
like a conditional.
Yeah, something like that, depending on how it happens. But like quarterback is the name of the game, and he still has 4 years left on his rookie deal for affordability. That you can do more things with that cap space that you save with Dalton, or you keep Dalton and you have Dalton playing ahead of Rosen, and you just have that kind of bridge transitional thing because Rosen's still 22 years old and he's not completely ready to take over the league by any means. So that 11th overall pick would definitely be on the table for me, and if it ends up coming to it, I would heavily consider it.
Yeah, I mean it's a little high for me, but I mean that might be what it takes. So for what was looked at as a premier quarterback in last year's draft. Last question, we'll get out of here, John. It's a quick one. I didn't get the name of this person, but it was a text coming in. Most important game on the schedule next season and why?
Oh my God, it's like February. Like we don't even know what these teams are going to look like. But let's see. They play the NFC West. They played the Rams in London.
Yep.
That's pretty damn important. They tied last time in London to the Redskins.
Yeah, thanks NFL. By the way, I was planning on going to that game in LA.
That's right, because you went to the Chargers game last year, right?
I did.
Yeah, but the Coliseum, I guess, is a better place than the StubHub Center. But,
yeah,
I think that's pretty important for Taylor's new squad to go up against his old squad. And I don't know if you call it prime time and like kicks off at 6:30 your local time in London.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's on the docket of importance. Obviously, the Steelers games are always important. They play the NFC West. What division of the AFC do they play? The South, maybe? The East? I want to say it's the East, but I'm not 100% sure. If they play the East, then obviously the Patriots, because they played the Chiefs last year, and the Chiefs are going to be like the next best thing in the AFC, and they failed that test miserably. So just any game against the Patriots are important to kind of a barometer of where you are compared to the lead in your conference. So that like those are two Super Bowl teams and your biggest rivals. So those are probably the biggest 4 games.
Yeah. So you've got looks like NFC West and AFC East.
Yeah. So two Super Bowl teams.
Yeah. To me, I mean, obviously, the division games are always the most important to me. For the first time in a long time, I'm going to say the Browns game. One of the Browns games is probably going to be the most important. I think the Steelers will be on the downswing based on all of the drama that they have. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to be terrible. I just think that they will not be a 10-win team like they usually are. Everybody and their mother is building up the Browns after what they did last year in Baker Mayfield. I would love to see them fall from grace. I saw a reporter today on Twitter saying he was going to tell Freddie Kitchens that he had the expectation that the Browns were going to go 12-4 next year. To me, I think a lot of people are going this way. I don't think there's a lot of people who are long-term believers in Lamar Jackson. I don't think a lot of people are high on the Steelers based on all of the attrition that's probably going to take place in some of their offensive skill positions, and then the Bengals are in a major state of transition themselves. So I think a lot of people think that this is the Browns' division to lose. Oddly enough, I'm going to say, whatever one you want to pick, the Browns game is probably going to be very important next year. And it's division, it's conference, all that kind of stuff. So to me, that's where I'd go. Thanks for all the questions tonight, guys, on a variety of different ways. We got texts, we had tweets, we had calls, all that kind of stuff. We probably had some more in the live YouTube chat. We're just running up against time, so I apologize we couldn't get to those. But if you ever want to send those to us, hit us up via Twitter or anything like that. you can send those our way. We'll try and get to those either on the show or on our mailbag feature that we do on cincyjungle.com. So we appreciate all the feedback and everything. You can get this show, as I've said a couple of times, on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play. You can get it on Megaphone. It's also on YouTube and cincyjungle.com. We appreciate the support. Any final thoughts before we get out of here, John Sheeran?
The John Ross rumors will not be the first lies you hear. Just remember that everyone lies, and they're all better than you.
You got a guess as to what another one might be?
We'll probably hear some free agency stuff. We've already been bamboozled with perfect news from our good buddy Andy Furman, but I think that's probably inevitable, and we might hear that as free agency kind of approaches. But right now they have 52 mil. They can add 6 million with perfect. He sucks. It seems like a no-brainer, and that would probably be my prediction of what happens with that. But other than that, maybe some other surprise cuts from some recent draft classes. I wouldn't, maybe like a Jordan Willis, something like that. I don't know, because this is a whole new coaching staff and they have whole new opinions on players that they didn't bring in. So it's going to be interesting what pops up and what's true and what's not.
Yeah, man, Jordan Willis, that was a guy I was excited about, and he has just not done much of anything since joining the Bengals, unfortunately. I don't really have too much of a final thought, but just letting our folks know, our listeners know, that we'll probably, for the live broadcast, will probably be, and my thanks to John Sheeran about this for his flexibility over the past couple of weeks, we probably will be recording Tuesday night next week, which actually timing-wise is pretty well because that's closer to the conclusion of the combine. So we're going to try and get maybe a guest or something like that on that was either there or is connected to the Bengals in some respect, and talk to them about that. So the show probably will be recorded Tuesday. I think that's what we agreed upon, John.
Yeah.
So we're just heads up on that. The stuff will show up on the feed a little bit earlier. But we appreciate all the support, and subscribe to our channels, and keep in touch with us. We want to hear from you guys. It's a listener-driven show, and we want to keep it that way. Thanks for everything. Thanks, John. Appreciate all your input. And hey, the combine's right around the corner. We're talking about a new league year here. Free agency will get started here in just a couple of weeks, and there's going to be a lot to talk about. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.